The After Show with TelecomTV's Guy Daniels and Ray Maistre.
We're back with another week of live discussion programs. Welcome to The After Show on TelecomTV. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and we are broadcasting live and waiting to hear from you, our audience, at the end of day one of the DSP Leaders World Forum 2021. We've got a great lineup of guests joining us today, primed and ready to answer all of your questions. We've already received some, but please do keep them coming. And if you haven't got in touch yet, then do so now using the form on the website below this video. Time to introduce my co-host for the After Show, Ray Maistre, Editorial Director at TelecomTV. Hello, Ray. Today's theme has been the Open Telco. What highlights have you seen today?
Well, hi Guy. Yes, we've had two great interviews, one with Andrea Donner from Vodafone UK and one with Deutsche Telekom's Abdu Razak Mudazir, both of which contain a healthy dose of OpenRAN, but neither of which is limited to that topic alone. We've also had two great roundtable discussions, one on the pros and cons of open DSP architectures and the other entitled OpenRAN, What's the Plan for 2021, which included a great deal of really interesting detail. So just a great start to the week, Guy.
It certainly has been, Ray, and it follows our belief that an open industry needs open debate. Talking of which, let's meet our guests, and joining us live on the programme today are Azar Saeed, who is Global Chief Architect at Red Hat, Obi Igonu, who is Director Global Service Provider Solutions Engineering at Worldwide Technology, Rick Hamilton, Senior Vice President with Siena's Blue Planet, and Richard Band, Head of Mobile Core and 5G Communications and Media Solutions, HPE. Hello everyone, very good to see you all again. Lots of questions to get through in the next 45 minutes or so. Azar, before we start, a quick question for you, because we're going to be asking this of all our guests this week. What got you into telecoms? How did you start your career in this industry?
Hi, Guy. Straight out of college, after doing my master's, I actually took up a job as a field engineer installing X25 and frame relay gear. So now I'm dating myself how long I've been in telecom industry. And since then, it's been, I worked at a NOC and then into software development and on and on. That's how I am.
Brilliant. Never try and work out how long we've all been in telecoms. It's an answer we don't really want to know. Thank you very much, Azar. Well, look, the first question we've got from our viewers here. For OpenRAN, is it possible to provide a reference architecture right now, given that specifications are still in development?
If you look at what's been done in the ORAN community, some of those specifications are reasonably settled. So for practical purposes, in terms of people deploying OpenRAN type of capability in their infrastructure, certainly you can build reference architectures. If you look at front haul, mid haul, and then back haul, those are all well known in terms of interfaces and APIs. As well as if you look at some of the other, O2 interface or E1 and E2 that are defined in ORAN, all those are reasonably well defined. So people can build some implementations and they can then put them together to build a reference architecture. It would be premature for me to say everything's complete. So there's probably some things that are subject to change. But the baseline split RAN architecture, and the disaggregation of components are the same. And then some of those key interfaces are reasonably secure in terms of change, that they can be now implemented, and people are beginning to do that. In fact, we've started to invest some time and effort with our partners to actually showcase some of these split RAN architectures with those interfaces, and actually build a reference model or a reference framework for people to actually go and deploy.
Okay, good to hear. Thanks very much. Anybody else want to have a thought about whether reference architectures are suitable now? Obi?
Yeah, no, I think Azar actually hit on a good point. So if you think of the telecom industry, the one constant thing is evolution. So at some point in time, you will always start at a point A and over time evolve to B and C and so on and so forth. So there isn't necessarily any need not to adopt a specific technology because the specs are still being probably reviewed or ratified or things along those lines. It's important to obviously understand, like, Azar pointed out, that specific elements within the framework are set. Those wouldn't necessarily change. What you would expect is some sort of evolution or tweaking, so to speak, of probably interfaces or protocols or communication between the across the different interface or reference point between the network functions in question. It's one of the things you also touched on, along the lines of what Worldwide does, especially with, partner ecosystems, where we come together and build out this, what we believe is a reference architecture that will essentially drive the adoption of OpenRAN within the industry.
Great, thank you. Well, unless any of our other guests want to comment on this one particularly, we'll hand over to Ray for our next question.
Okay, thanks a lot, Guy. So Rick, we're going to come to you next. So icebreaker question for you as well. What got you into telecoms? How did you start your career in this industry?
Well, the truth is, Ray, I was sort of kidnapped. I was working for a company and Cisco system came along and acquired them. They pulled the van up, clubbed me in the head and put a bag over my head. And 20 years later here, and that's a joke. No, I was with a company that got acquired by Cisco, and I worked in a lot of different businesses for them, but I wound up in the telecom space basically through them.
Okay, excellent. Oh, I'm sure that's a way that a lot of people got into this industry over the years as well. So Rick, let's come to a question from our audience. So for digital service providers, do they need a completely new software stack to enable the automation that they need in open networks? Automation very often cited as something that's absolutely essential to open networks. And if they do need a completely new software stack, how does this differ from traditional OSS stacks?
Yeah, it's a risky question, Ray, because to sort of broadcast that all the service providers need a brand new software stack is likely to put a bunch of CFOs in cardiac arrest. So I think it depends, right, on where they are in their evolution. We see a number of customers have sort of been on this journey for a few years, and so they probably have less of a transformation. But I think for a bulk of the service providers around the world, they are looking at a significant need to transform their software stack to not only deal with the open architectures, but to deal with the digital experience that their customers are looking for. And we say, look, if you need $1 million in 12 months to make any change inside your organization, you probably have an architectural problem within your software stack, and you really need to think about the journey to deal with that. Because as Obi said earlier, change is constant, but what's happening right now is change is going to come at a frequency that I don't know that we all appreciate yet. It's been common in technology, but it's certainly going to hit home in the service provider space. So what's different is, I think these software components and the architecture within what we used to call the OSS environment, it has to be very adaptable. And a big part of the show has been talking about standards and the application of standards and getting the benefit out of what those standards will actually bring to the table. And our view is, you're going to see a pretty big need for some significant changes in the software stack because of that. And I think it's a matter of fact, and I think many of our customers recognize that today.
Okay, excellent. Richard, I could see you wanted to come in on this one as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, indeed. I think that you asked about, do we need a different stack for automation? And I think the experience has shown that building automation on top of something that is already in play is rather painful. We've done CI/CD on software stacks that were 10, 15 years old, and it's really, really hard to bring in the automation in terms of automated testing, and in terms of automated deployment, to be able to scale, to move workloads around. And so clearly from our side, when we looked at 5G and we looked at the kind of dynamicity and the level of automation you need to achieve in 5G network, we said that the only way to do this is to go through cloud native. And if you go through cloud native, it means a clean sheet. So I strongly believe that for 5G to fulfill its potential, to have the pace of change that Rick was talking about, to achieve the degree of automation, I think we need to master those changes. Yeah, definitely significant change in the architecture is needed, in particular, a very strong separation of the call processing, the application logic, and the data that is underlying to give you much more flexibility in moving workloads around and scaling up and scaling down.
Excellent. Azar, did you want to come in on that one as well? Yes, Azar.
Yes, briefly. I beg to differ a little bit from our panelists in the sense that I think there are degrees of automation. There is certainly, to achieve baseline automation, you don't need to change your software stack. You can actually, there are tool sets that are available today where you can apply automation to that. And in fact, we have examples of several telcos using Ansible to apply automation to their legacy devices and systems. So can you do automation on your legacy infrastructure? The answer is yes, you can. I think the part that both Richard and Rick were talking about was, in order to really achieve the full power of automation and then go to that particular next level, it's better you have a different stack. And I think that's the key difference that I'd like to just outline.
Okay, great. So some automation possible now with legacy networks, but for open networks, it looks like there needs to be a definite evolution to eventually to a new stack. Okay, so I think we can move on. Or Obi, did you want to come in on that, or should we move on?
No, I think we can move on. I think they've talked on the key aspects. So.
Great, excellent. Okay, Guy, over to you for the next question.
Yep, thank you, Ray. And a reminder to our viewers, keep the questions coming in, please. We'll get through as many as we can. And I am noticing that we've had a couple of questions just based on that last exchange of viewpoints as well. So we'll get to those in a few moments. But Obi, if I can turn to you now, before I give the viewer question to you, I'm going to ask you the same as we've been asking all other guests so far. And that is, what got you into telecoms? How did you start in the industry?
Yeah, no, thanks, guy. That's a good question. I think I would take it back to 2001 when GSM got introduced in Nigeria. I think that was essentially what drew me into telco. And then right after that, it essentially proceeded to completing my master's. And right after my master's, which again was focused on telecom, I joined Nortel, and the rest is essentially history because we all know what happened to Nortel. But it's been an evolution ever since then, and one that I've definitely cherished all through my experience.
Fantastic, thanks for that. Nortel, yes, I do recall them. So here's our viewer question. We'll move on swiftly. Here's our viewer question to Obi. To what extent is a distributed telco edge architecture needed for the deployment of an effective open network?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. If you look at the overall architecture end to end and how components within the architecture have been either decomposed or decoupled, a distributed architecture serves that enabler for specific concepts like mobile edge computing or multi-access edge computing that essentially aids to drive innovation and deployment of edge-related technologies. So it's suffice to say you can't necessarily have 5G without edge computing, and you can't have edge computing without a distributed architecture, if that makes any sense. So it's one of the key components I'd like to describe of a 5G network, and a 5G network that helps drive, like I said, innovation, ability to deliver new services, helping service providers be more agile in delivering those services, and also implementing different aspects of operational efficiencies. So yes, I do completely agree with the point that a distributed architecture is required if you're going to be, essentially leveraging the benefit that it provides.
Okay, thanks very much, Obi. Any of our other guests want to comment on whether a distributed edge architecture is necessary for a truly open telecoms network? Any more viewpoints? If not,
I would actually.
Oh, Azar?
Sorry. I would actually frame it the other way. I think open is necessary to build a distributed architecture.
I see. It's in the semantics there. That's yes.
Good
We'll get in touch with our viewer who sent that question in, and we'll tell him he's got it the wrong way around there. Ray, I think we'll move on to our next question, shall we?
Yep, absolutely. Okay, thanks. So coming to Richard, and Richard, the question we've asked everybody else here today: what got you into telecoms? How did you start in this industry?
Okay, well, what got me into telecoms was a very good professor in university who taught communication protocols, and he really got me excited about how the different elements of a distributed system work together to communicate. And from there, I started in telecoms at a time where SIGTRAN was super sexy, and started working on FTTP in development, and from development to pre-sales and sales and various other roles. And so it's been a while. Talking like looking back like this.
Well, I guess a question in the future could be for another panel, another day, is SIGTRAN still sexy? But we'll come to that another day. But in the meantime,
I remember when it was sexy. That's the important piece.
But to come back to the question that's come in today on our Open Telco theme, and I suspect that this question, the catalyst for this question came from a very recent announcement. But the question is, do open virtualized telco networks need a new breed of underlying IT hardware, or is off-the-shelf good enough? So off-the-shelf servers good enough for an open network, or do we need, I guess, what you might call carrier-grade servers and IT hardware?
Well, for sure, we've recognized since a long time, I would say, especially since we started working on NAV, that clearly the workloads in telecom are a bit special and require some changes. And we've been working in HP. We've been working since NAV on what we initially called NAV systems, and then we called telco blueprints. But those telco blueprints have been off-the-shelf products with specific configurations to run telco workloads. So that's what we did up until now. Now it's true, and I think that's what you're referring to, is the announcement we did 2 weeks ago, is we did launch a new server, the DL110, specifically for ORAN vRAN. So in this case, while the components inside may be standard, we recognize that we needed a specific form factor designed for the RAN at the edge. And we introduced this product, and this is actually the first time in many years that we created a product that was specifically designed for telecommunications. So we are moving a little bit in a direction here of specialized equipment, precisely because of the form factor and environmental requirements that are related to the RAN. In the core network, we still use these kind of blueprints I was referring to. Actually, the HP 5G core stack is built on a telco blueprint that we built together with Red Hat for containerization. Towards the edge, we are using now this DL110 to give us a different form factor, a different capability set.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that at this point it looks like that open telco networks might develop with a mix of specialized hardware, maybe with extra acceleration, and then more regular off-the-shelf server hardware?
Yeah, I think it will be depending on where you place your workload. So the same workloads may actually run on standard server if it's in a centralized data center. And if we put it in, as we're seeing at the moment, for instance, in private networking, private 5G, private 4G, we get a lot of demand to put everything on a single DL110, specifically because it gets placed in places where otherwise, normal form factor doesn't fit. That same software, though, runs perfectly fine on a classical DL360 when it's in a centralized data center. So it will be really depending on the use case, on the placement, and more than, I would say, the actual software itself.
Okay, excellent. Anybody else want to comment? Yes, Azar.
Yeah, very quickly, I think Richard said a few important points. Form factor is one key issue, but in terms of actually looking at the functionality, hardware acceleration that you mentioned, Ray, the goal of the software platform that's running on this type of hardware is to expose this type of functionality so that these applications, network functions can utilize them appropriately, which means at a hardware layer, I don't want to really call it a telecom specific or special hardware, because the same need for hardware acceleration is by an enterprise customer too, is by any typical large customer. If you're doing a lot of data munging, data analytics, packet forwarding, all of those things require a level of performance from the hardware. So form factor aside, these things I believe are common threads, regardless of whether they're telecom industry or a typical financial enterprise or any other high performance requirements that you need for different market verticals. Now, what we do need to do, though, is expose these capabilities, these hardware capabilities, in a consistent manner so that applications can utilize them and build that cloud infrastructure. And I think that's what is key to the success, instead of swinging the pendulum all the way out again to build appliances.
Okay. All right, great. Rick.
Yeah, I just would add one point. I think all of those points are relevant. When I heard that question, what came to mind for me, and certainly I've got a long history in the networking equipment space. When you think about disaggregation and open networks, and now you apply it to what's happening with what I'll just loosely call compute infrastructure, the industry has spent literally billions of dollars trying to be focused on, what we call space and power consumption. And I think as we think about the disaggregation and the distribution of compute, that's going to be an issue for everybody. Probably more so than throughput and performance. I mean, the big tech world, the Silicon Valley folks, they're going to take care of capacity and performance needs. I think we can all be assured of that. I think the real question is, can we do it with the space constraints and certainly the power demands that will allow people to scale out and to scale up? And the hyperscale folks, you think about Google, Amazon, Microsoft with Azure, they've been worried about this for a very long time. So I just wanted to add that point. I think that is a key aspect to that whole question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Guy and I have been hearing this topic crop up more and more in our discussions with service providers as well in the past 3 to 6 months. I think this is definitely starting to become more of an issue in the sector. Okay, I think then we can move on back to Guy. Back over to you, Guy.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. And before we move on to our next viewer question, let me tell you more about the series of polls that we are running. Now, every day this week, we are posting a new poll question related to the theme of the day. Each question's a simple multiple choice, 5 answers, basically ranging from I strongly agree to I strongly disagree. It only takes a few seconds, so please click on your choice of answer and have your say. The poll is right here on the website. Now, today's question is, will the use of open networking technology really reduce total cost of ownership and help network operators to adopt innovative applications more easily? And you can see the current split of opinions right here, trending towards the positive, which will be a relief to all of us. So if you want your vote counted, then go ahead and click on the poll, because this poll is going to be open all week. Right, back to our Q&A, and as I say, do keep your questions coming. This is very much your program. Over to you, Ray, for our next viewer question.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Guy, and thanks to all the people that have voted in that poll. We've seen those votes come in during the day. Right, so the next question is, so I'll have to concentrate to read this one. This is a question about standards. How does the panel see the OpenRAN and 3GPP communities converging or diverging in the coming years? Will it bring market fragmentation or simply a new type of standards toolkit for the open telco to choose from? So the relationship between, I guess, what you might call the traditional standard body, 3GPP, and the new industry bodies that are developing open telco specifications. So Azar, do you want to come in on this one? How do you think this one will play out?
So I think 3GPP has done a very good job of defining the disaggregated RAN architecture, right, as part of 3GPP releases. What OpenRAN is really trying to do is standardize some of the interfaces that are between those components, and providing a reference toolkit as well as reference software code. ORAN SC has some reference software code as well for the RIC, and also some APIs and definitions. So in my opinion, what ORAN's really doing is double clicking in the implementation of some of the 3GPP specs and defining where things may be not that clear. So in my opinion, I don't know if they're completely diverging. I don't think they are. And if you look at the 3GPP release 17, some of the components that are discussed in release 17 are more around advanced slicing architecture and carrier aggregation and so on. So I think these go hand in hand, in my opinion. In my opinion, the community, the ORAN community, has done a great service in terms of decoding those components for all of us so that they can be implemented in a consistent manner, and hence allow that disaggregation of RAN components to happen, thereby providing in more innovation. Now, one thing that I'd like to really point to our viewers here is the RIC architecture as an example. The disaggregated architecture that RIC has provided, RAN Intelligent Controller has provided, allows you to now integrate third-party software on top of a RIC to control your RAN components, wherein you can improve things like spectral efficiency, you can improve, better data throughput, beam steering, things like those that are really complex capabilities that were previously just stuck or delivered by one vendor. Now anybody can add value through innovation through this particular model. So I believe they're, two wheels of the same vehicle that's driving in the right direction.
Okay, and by the sound of it, you see, to use those two examples that came in the question, 3GPP and ORAN, whether that's the OpenRAN group in TIP or the ORAN Alliance, continuing to work side by side and complementing each other.
Absolutely.
Obi, okay, Obi, do you agree? Do you see them continuing side by side? Do you see any overlap or
yeah, no, absolutely. No, there's going to be a convergence at some point, in much the same way as you saw a convergence between 3GPP's work and ETSI's work on virtualization as well. I think it really comes down to a couple of key items. The first is, what is the goal, right? So in 3GPP release 15 and by extension 16, it was all about disaggregation. It was all about functional splits. And like Azar alluded to, ORAN, the ORAN Alliance, ORAN specifications essentially doubled down on that functional split or disaggregation in order to embed open interfaces and a level of intelligence in terms of automation and managing those functions that have been deployed. So, it goes without saying, at some point, both organizations will work hand in hand as the technology around ORAN matures, and in terms of driving the overall adoption of an open network with disaggregated functional splits from an end-to-end architecture perspective.
Okay, great. Okay, excellent. Well, hopefully that question has been answered there for our viewer. So, Guy, back over to you for the next question.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. And we've got a question like a similar vein, really, about standards and how they impact with the open telco. In fact, one of our panels today brought up the subject of what happens when you've got a standards body which is weighted towards more vendors than operators, and what the consequences of that may be. But the viewer question is very specific here, and it comes from a telco, and the question is, how do you combat the vendor's natural tendency of protectionism? That is, they adopt and bend the standards to fit their own purpose, product roadmap or agenda. How do CSPs enforce the API standards and keep the spirit of open API standards and its tenets? It's a slightly controversial question, but that's what we're here for. Richard, perhaps I could ask for your opinions on this one first.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. First of all, in the question there is an opposition between the vendors and the telco operators, as if the vendors are all by definition desiring this kind of proprietary features. Speaking for ourselves, historically, we've been providing point solutions into the network and never providing the end-to-end capability sets, with all in-house components. We've always been a firm believer in open standards simply because it gives us a level playing field to allow us to compete in those areas where we believe we have a strong and differentiated offer. And it's in fact feedback that I've received in the past from customers that one of the reasons they desired to work with us was pretty much to keep some of the behavior that you were describing there, it was described in the question, in check on the behavior that the larger legacy vendors may exhibit. And again, I think there are suppliers like ourselves, but we're not the only ones that benefit from open standards, that benefit from a level playing field. And in that sense, their interest and the interest of our interest and the interest of the operators definitely align. So I think my easy answer to you is, if you want to avoid lock-in, the best way to do is go with multi-vendor. For anyone that goes into multi-vendor, the easiest way to make solutions out of multiple vendors work together is by adopting the standards. And it's in the interest of anyone that is promoting a multi-vendor approach to promote a strict adherence to the standards, simply because it's the lowest cost way of making the solution work for us.
Thank you for that, Richard. Multi-vendor approach, the way forward. Rick, do you want to come in and add your views to this question?
Yeah, I do. I mean, having a fairly long history with one of the big vendors, I have a strong belief that none of us on the vendor side, jump in a room and try to figure out how to bend standards around to meet our own needs. I mean, we're all trying to do the best we can to grow our own businesses. And I think I'll be a little bit provocative, and I'll tell you the challenge from the other side of the table when it comes to standards, has always been unification with the telcos themselves. So the CSPs or the DSPs really coming together and being the loudest voice on those standards bodies and really driving what they think the industry needs. Because I guarantee you, if the leading telco providers around the world come together with a strong belief of what these standards should be and how they should be managed, the vendor community is going to respond to that. There's no question about it. I think the problem is, the real impact will come to end customers, right? So if vendors and communication providers are disjointed about how these standards were evolved or will evolve, you wind up with fragmentation in the market, which is ultimately really bad for customers. So this is about, maybe it's a new day, but it's really about, don't point the finger across the table, but it's about the major vendors architecturally and most importantly, the telco community coming together and really enforcing these standards. And you can enforce them in multiple ways. I mean, we see it today in our business. We have to adhere to certain standards or we can't comply to a tender, for example. But we also see that very fragmented around the world. So bottom line for me is, I think this community, by community I mean the telco providers around the world, have an obligation to come together and be a bigger driving force in these standards, and the vendor community will comply. I really think it's as simple. It's easier said than done, but that will be the driving force, in my opinion.
Thank you very much for that, Rick. And yes, I think we are certainly seeing this desire from certainly a group of telcos to come together with one voice and drive things forward. Let's see how that pans out. Azar.
Yeah, I think 2 points. One, it's a value game, right? Every vendor is interested in adding value to what they build. And in turn, obviously, they're competing for business, right? So they want to be able to showcase their solutions better. Now, Red Hat being in the open source domain, the way we work is very different from any of these vendors, where we try to actually bring in different open source solutions and integrate them by providing value. And I think every vendor is trying to do that, so you really can't blame them from what they're trying to do. I think Rick had an important point, which is, if telcos took a stake in this approach and said, well, understand and appreciate value and innovation that each vendor brings to the table, but it needs to be done in a manner that allows a telco to build really a best of breed capability, an infrastructure, a platform, a software, but using that particular approach. Then it has to go the disaggregation route. It has to be, where you bring in really the best software, the best capability that comes from anywhere, not necessarily from a single vendor. So I think Rick's spot on when he says telcos need to take that step and they need to actually participate more, because if they really say so and not cop out, I think the vendors will comply. The vendors will, adhere to the requirements that they have.
Thank you, Azar. In the interest of completion, Obi, do you want to come in on this one? It's been a popular one.
Yeah, I think I'll just round it out. These are all valid points everyone has raised, but I actually like the point that Richard brought, wherein, he talks about if SPs actually want to have a strong say in this, it's by driving or implementing a multi-vendor solution. Because that essentially forces all the OEMs to work according to the standardized interfaces and open interfaces that have been created. It goes without saying that, SPs, favor a multi-vendor solution over a horizontal telco cloud stack, so to speak. So, it's one of the things where, hey, as an SP, if you really want to enforce, a multi-vendor OEM solution, or if you really want to enforce the ability for OEM solutions to interoperate efficiently and seamlessly, then go with solutions where, it's coming from OEM X, Y, and Z, and interoperating or integrating efficiently across those standardized interfaces.
Great question. Great comments from you all. And with that, Ray, let's hand it back to you for our next question.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, it would be unusual if we had an open telco day and didn't have a question that was specifically about integration. So here it is, and of course that was touched on in the answers to that last question. But the next question is, can open networks be integrated with existing technology, or do they need to be overlays? Now, actually, we've heard from some operators recently that some of their open deployments are going to be greenfield or overlays, and eventually some will likely be integrated, particularly in OpenRAN when it gets to the urban environments. This question about integration of existing technology or overlays, Obi, do you want to come in and talk about that one?
Yeah, sure. I think it comes down to where the specific SP is in their digital transformation journey. So to an extent, if I think to the example you brought up, if you have an SP that's starting out from a greenfield deployment, they could very well just be good to go. But then if it's an SP that's in a brownfield deployment that's looking to leverage, that sort of SDN concept or technology, there may be some implementations where overlays are required if you want to be efficient in deploying these sort of architectures from an end-to-end perspective. What I will say, though, in the midst of all this, is that's where the value of, say, a systems integrator comes in, because we're now able to help partner with SPs as they navigate this journey and complexities along this journey in terms of implementing new technologies that could either be complementary to what they have currently deployed, or essentially doubling down on the new concept that they're trying to implement from a services perspective.
Okay, great. Any other takers for this question, or we will move back over to Guy. Guy, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ray. We're getting a few questions coming in right towards the end of the show. As always happens, please everyone get your questions in as soon as you can, so we've got a chance to answer them. Here's the next question we've just got in. There are arguments about whether OpenRAN networks are less secure or more secure than existing networks. Is there any way of telling whether an OpenRAN network is secure or not?
I'll take that, Guy.
Security question, Azar?
Yes. Actually, I'll point to a paper that was done very recently by Red Hat, Altiostar, Mavenir, and a couple of other people in terms of actually looking at the overall OpenRAN architecture and looking at security at all different layers. From an infrastructure security perspective, in terms of how do you secure your devices, your operational models, to actually even looking at 3GPP security context, right? In terms of how a UE attaches, what sort of security mechanisms do you need, how do you do RAN control, and what sort of security mechanisms do you need, and so on. And it's been very well documented in about a 45-page paper that was also, I believe, submitted back to the ORAN Alliance as part of this particular discussion, because this did come up for a debate recently. I think, unfortunately, some vendors are trying to throw some FUD in there, fear, uncertainty, doubt, to say, well, if you don't have all these components, the CU and the DU and the RU from the same vendor, then you have security issues. I think that's absolutely FUD in my opinion. I think there's, people have learned to build internet architectures and secure them. People have learned to build large transport networks and secure them. People will also learn to build, OpenRAN architectures and secure them. So in my opinion, that's absolutely I don't believe that argument stands, on its own 2 feet or has any merit, in my opinion.
Thank you, Azar. Rick.
Yeah, I would just add to Azar's point. If you look at the history of, even the recent history of sort of real security breaches, at least those that have been publicized, I would challenge you to sort of bifurcate those by legacy non-open infrastructure versus recently new open infrastructure. I don't think you draw any conclusions there, right? So security is about sort of the standards conversation we had before. For this community to kind of go to the vendors and say, well, we want to buy all this from you, we want it to be absolutely secure, it doesn't work, right? It's how do you deploy it? What is the lifecycle management approach that you use? What is your own internal security posture? So I tend to agree there's a fair amount of FUD about open being not secure. It certainly has risk with it, but sweating assets in your environment for 15 years running legacy code on that infrastructure has just as much threat and vulnerability inherent in that posture than deploying new open architecture. So I think the question is sort of, I like to call it religious FUD. It's a belief that we have in something that's never really played out in the market. So I definitely agree with his position on that.
Thank you very much, Rick. Well, I think we're going to try and squeeze in one more question from our audience. So let me hand over to Ray.
Okay, and this one is so hot off the press, I'm going to have to switch screens here to ask it. And it's a very specific question, but it's a very good one. So here's the question. For some vendors, it is their business case to deliver patents in order to generate license fees. This could be an obstacle regarding an open ecosystem. What should happen to change this kind of behavior, or to maybe, I guess, to enhance or change that kind of business plan? So I guess the question here is, will patents get in the way, and IPR get in the way of the development of an open ecosystem? Rick, thank you. Do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, happy to take a stab at that. I think it goes a little bit to the question that was answered earlier around standards. And somebody on the panel, I'm sorry, I don't remember who, made the point that it's all going to be about what the service providers around the world place value on, right? Heretofore, in the recent past, there's been an enormous amount of value placed on what in the industry we call features and functions, or speeds and feeds. As a vendor, we were all rewarded for the intellectual sort of technology and property that we brought to the table. The telcos have the power to change that, right? If they start to place value on standards versus differentiated patented technology, they're going to see a shift in the vendor's behavior, because we will all move very rapidly as the industry moves. But if the industry bifurcated, and sort of to be very illustrative, RFP1 wants a whole bunch of technical innovation and doesn't really care about standards, and RFP2 wants standards and doesn't really care about technical innovation, well, then the vendors are going to have to make a decision. And by that nature, then they become in the driver's seat. So again, patents getting in the way of open, I don't think that's the problem. What's going to get in the way of open will be broad adoption of it within the CSP community, and the vendors will follow along. They'll place value in their products accordingly. So what's asked of us will be delivered in the long term. I fully believe that. And if you believe that that's an issue and you want to avoid it, you have to change sort of how you place value on solutions from vendors.
Okay, great insight, Rick. Does anybody else want to weigh on this at all? Okay, I don't see any takers, and I can see a red light flashing at the top of my screen as well, which suggests that we are just over our allotted time, I think, guys. So I'm going to hand back over to you at this point.
Thank you very much, Ray. Yes, we are out of time, but only just. It's the end of our after show for today. Thank you so much to all of our guests who joined us for this live program, and to our audience for sending in their questions. Now, we'll be back tomorrow with another live after show program. In the meantime, Ray and I are off to enjoy cocktail hour and the all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yeah, and if you haven't yet watched our 2 roundtables and our 2 one-to-one interviews from today, then they are available now on demand, along with all of our other exclusive interviews.
And tomorrow's theme at DSP Leaders World Forum is enhancing the ecosystem, with 2 more roundtables for you, followed by our live Q&A show. So we hope to see you then, but goodbye for now.
The after show was recorded in front of a live online audience.